Well, hey everybody, how are you today? Great to see you. Welcome to all of our campuses, and so great to be together. Those watching online as well. I want to say Happy Mother's Day to you. Could we, wherever we are, give it up for our moms today? Yeah, we want to celebrate you. It's really fun for us to be able to dedicate a morning and a service and to look at God's Word at just a woman that was a great example for us, but just to say a huge thank you to all of our moms today. So it's our privilege to be able to do that today. I also want to say this, for some of you, Mother's Day is actually a hard day, and we want to acknowledge that as well. That might be maybe because of the way that, your upbringing, maybe a relationship right now even that's not going well. I know of a family that lost a child this last year, and they've surely been on our hearts as we've approached Mother's Day and this morning as well. And so we're praying for you, and we're asking just for God's grace to meet you today, if today is a harder day for you. So I just want you to know that you're on our hearts and on our minds. Today what we're going to do is this. We're going to turn to God's Word, and if you have a Bible, you can turn there now. We're going to be in Ruth chapter 1 is where we're going to start today. And then we're going to take some time. I'm just going to teach briefly today, and then we're going to watch an interview that I think is really going to encourage you with some of our moms today. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun for us. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to look at the book of Ruth. And in the life of Ruth, we see a woman that exemplified some things that inspire us. They inspire our faith. They inspire us to be the kind of people that I really believe that God longs for us to be. She had some things in her character at a heart level that were very significant. And so I think you're going to be inspired as we look at her example today. I was in a meeting this last week, and I was sitting across the table from someone, and behind them was this big window, and we were on the second floor of this building. But behind them, I could see this tree that was just getting whipped around by the wind. I mean, the wind was really howling. I think this was on Tuesday. And this tree was just going back. If I was waiting for a branch just to fly off, But here's the thing. I bet if I could have gone from the top of that tree, which was just going crazy, and I could have just zeroed in on just the trunk, I bet you we couldn't even have been able to have seen that it was a very, very windy day. That trunk would have been stable, strong, and secure. Let me ask you a question. Do you know anybody like this? Do you know anybody that you would just say of them, they're just faithful, they're just loyal, they just keep moving along in the right direction? Do you know any people like that? What I admire about the person that we're going to look at in the scriptures today is that this woman was steady. This woman was faithful. She was consistent. And if there's anything that I think really marked her life, it's this word loyal. She was incredibly loyal. We're also going to see this, though, in the book of Ruth, that we see the faithfulness of God. We see that God, that his presence is long, I call it long game felt. That you can see how God was faithful throughout this story, not just in the short term, but in the long term. We're going to see three characters in the story in the book of Ruth today. We're going to see, first we're going to see Naomi, she's the widow. We're going to see Ruth, she's the Moabite. But we're also going to see Boaz, and he's kind of this no-nonsense farmer. So let's pick up together. Look with me at verse 1. We're in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi." Now let's start with that very first statement. It says, in the days when the judges ruled. Everybody know this. These were stormy days. These were not pleasant. These were not days that you would say, oh, I wish I could have lived during that time period. You would have not have wanted to at all. These days were filled with unfaithfulness to God. These days were filled with heinous crimes. These days were filled with idolatry. And right in the midst of that, though, there's this incredible glimmer of hope. We were driving home last night from Cherokee, Iowa. We went up there yesterday afternoon for a graduation party for some friends. And so we're driving home, and as you know, it was just storming all over the state last night. And so it was just storm after storm after storm, and the rain, just sheets of rain coming down. But at one particular point, the clouds kind of cleared, and the sun came out, and out comes this beautiful rainbow. And it was kind of like this picture of hope, right? You know what? The book of Ruth, everybody, it's like that. It's like there's storms going on all over the place, but then we get this glimmer of hope right in the midst of a period of darkness, and it's as though we see the faithfulness of God on display in a very dark time, the period of the judges. Now know this, and I'm not sure maybe what you would say characterizes the season of life that you're in, but maybe you would say it's one of those seasons where you just say, I got to press on. I just got to keep going. I think that's what's happening here in the book of Ruth. We're seeing faithfulness on display. So here's what's happening. In the context of this period of the judges, so a very, very dark period of time. It actually says in the scriptures that in those days, Israel had no king and everyone did whatever they saw fit. So it was a free-for-all. That's the context. So in the midst of that, though, there's a famine. And in the midst of this famine, this Israelite family, they're struggling to survive. So they pack up and they go to a place called Moab, which was actually enemy territory. So this family goes to Moab and they're in search of food. And while they're there, the father of the family dies. The father had 2 sons, though. Those 2 sons marry. Now those 2 sons, they die as well. So we're left with a widow named Naomi, and we're left with her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Now Naomi, she knows, okay, I am now a widow. I'm unmarried. I'm not probably going to remarry. I'm not going to have any more sons. And so she knows it is not wise for her to stay in a foreign land, in Moab. And so she says, you know what, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to go back home to Bethlehem. And so she sets out and she says, I'm going to leave. But she tells her 2 daughters-in-law, do not come with me. You don't want to go with me. It's going to be hard. You should stay here. You'll be better off if you stay. And Orpah says, okay, I'll stay. But Ruth says, no, I will go with you. And this is the first thing we see straight out of the book of Ruth, straight out of her character, everybody. She was so faithful. She was faithful to God, but she was also faithful to Naomi. Look at verse 16, chapter 1. Ruth is faithful. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Do you see her level of faithfulness and commitment? And then she says this, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you from me. Everybody, Ruth was faithful in the mundane. Now keep in mind, Ruth didn't have the advantage of reading the book of Ruth and like knowing how this was going to play out. But even not knowing, she's committed to this woman named Naomi. Now know this, Naomi is upset at God. God, how could you take my husband? Oh God, how could you take, particularly in the land that they were living in and all it meant to have sons? Lord, how could you take my 2 sons? She's bitter. She feels as though God is punishing her. So she changes her name to Mara, which means bitter. Now let me ask you a question. Would you like to pack up everything you have, leave your immediate family, and go dedicate your life to a woman who just changed her name to bitter? Not a good plan, right? No, not a happy Mother's Day, right? Not good at all. So they move. Ruth is faithful in the mundane. And Ruth is out now, and she's collecting grain. She's getting food for them to eat. And if you look in Leviticus chapter 19 or Deuteronomy 24, you see that there was a system. It was kind of a dignified welfare system of the time where if you had a field and you were harvesting, you left the edges for the poor. And so the poor could come along and they would be taken care of. Well, that's what Ruth is doing. Well, she just happens, though, to be in a field of a man named Boaz. Boaz just happens to be a relative of Naomi. And we know this about Boaz. Boaz is a man of noble character. He's a good man. And so Boaz finds out about Ruth's story. And he understands, Ruth, you came and you've been so kind to Naomi. And he begins to be so generous to her. He makes provisions for her. And in this story, everybody, and I would encourage you, look into detail into it later today. But we begin to see the faithfulness of God blessing the faithfulness of Ruth. The deck is stacked against Ruth. But she remains faithful. And God now is faithful to her. You know, when I read this story, it's just those 2 words. And some of you, I think you felt this way, particularly in the last year. You just felt like, I just need to be faithful. We say it around here, we say, just show up. Jesus said it like this, be faithful in the small things. Ruth was this way. She was just committed to God. Eugene Peterson, I love how he talked about this value of being faithful. He says it like this, it's long obedience in the same direction. We see this in the life of Ruth, and we see then that God blesses it. And so many things that we celebrate today on Mother's Day are all about long obedience in the same direction. Mom, we just want to say to you, thanks for being obedient in what sometimes just seems like the mundane. Thanks for being faithful. Thanks for just being continually consistent day after day. Not perfect, but faithful. So Boaz, if you continue on in the story, continues to bless Ruth. He eventually takes her to be his wife. And this, in turn, becomes a huge blessing to Naomi in the process. And so think about this. Ruth has been faithful to Naomi, and now God is using this. Now Boaz is being faithful to Ruth, and God continues just to pour his blessing and his grace on them. And everybody remember this too. This is all happening while Naomi was thinking that God was against her. And maybe you feel like that. But one thing for sure that Naomi took away from this, from her life example, from her story, was that God, you were faithful when I didn't think you were faithful. And so you keep going in this story, and this is the last thing that I want us to pull out of it today. Here it is. The way that the book ends is so significant. The book ends with this genealogy, and it shows us that Ruth and Boaz now have a son. His name is Obed. And if you look at chapter 4, verse 22, you see the significance of this blessing, really, that God brought into their life. Because Obed was the grandfather of King David. Look at verse 22. It says this. It says, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David. Now, if you flip in your New Testament to the book of Matthew, chapter 1, you see that, okay, wow, you got this whole genealogy in there, and it's the genealogy of who? Of Jesus Christ. And there's Boaz, and there's Ruth. And then chapter 1 of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 16, it says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Everybody, think about this for a second. God has been so faithful to the faithfulness of Ruth. Ruth was faithful in the mundane. She was loyal to the purposes and to the presence of God, but also to the purposes of people in her life. And then I love how God allowed generations to be impacted by the faithfulness of Ruth. And so it's not just like it's just a one-time deal, but no. God, you were always working in Naomi's life. God, you were always present. Maybe when Ruth was just wondering, well, should I go? But she decided to go, and she remained faithful, and we see that God impacted generation after generation after generation. And then you and I, man, we get to put our faith in Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ coming straight out of the lineage of David. It's a beautiful, incredible story.